a... Let me ask you something. Have you ever walked away from someone and wondered if they'd even notice? Or worse, if they'd ever truly regret losing you? The truth is, regret doesn't come from absence. It comes from realization. Realizing they lost something rare. Realizing they thought you'd wait, and you didn't, your absence. Realizing the person they took for granted won't be there when they finally decide to get it together. And here's the part most people don't. You don't need to manipulate someone into regretting losing you. You don't need to play games or seek revenge. You just have to do this. When someone you care about starts pulling away or takes you for granted, the most natural response is to want to explain, to chase, to fix. You want to be understood. You want them to see your value again. But here's the truth that most people miss: the more noise you make, the less impact you have. If you truly want someone to regret losing you, it won't come from a dramatic exit or a flood of texts telling them what they did wrong. It comes from quiet strength, what I call pulling back with dignity, not drama. Dignity is your power. It's the calm in the storm that says, I won't beg for what should be freely given. When you stop engaging, when you don't react with anger or try to guilt them into staying, you create space. And in that space, they start to feel the weight of what they've lost. This isn't about emotional manipulation. It's about reclaiming your self-respect. You're not punishing them, you're protecting yourself. Here's why this works. When you withdraw your attention without explanation, it disrupts the pattern. They're expecting you to plead, to ask why, to demand closure. But instead, you go quiet, not in a passive-aggressive way, but in a grounded, confident way. That's unsettling, in the best way possible. It flips the script. Suddenly, they're the ones wondering, wait, why isn't she chasing me? The silence becomes the loudest message you could ever send. People often confuse silence with weakness. But in truth, silence from someone with emotional maturity is a sign of massive strength. It says, I know my worth. I know what I bring to the table. And if you can't see that, I'll leave the table. You're not storming out, slamming doors, or blocking them for show. You're simply done, gracefully. That kind of exit sticks in someone's mind. It doesn't just make them think about you. It makes them think about themselves, their behavior, and what they failed to appreciate. There's something else that happens when you pull back with dignity. You regain control over your own emotional energy. Instead of putting it into trying to change someone or win them back, you start investing in yourself. Your peace returns. You're not anxiously checking your phone, rereading messages, or rehearsing conversations in your head. You've made a choice. Not out of spite, but out of self-love. And that choice frees you. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't easy. Especially when you have history with someone. When you've opened your heart to them, there's a voice in your head that says, but maybe if I just say one more thing, maybe if I just explain how much I care. And that's where the dignity test comes in. Ask yourself, if I have to convince someone to care, is that the kind of connection I really want? True connection doesn't need chasing. It's mutual. It flows in both directions. So when you feel the urge to reach out one more time, pause. Instead, shift the energy inward. Use that moment to affirm your own value. Go to the gym. Call a friend. Work on something that moves you forward. Every time you resist the temptation to chase, you strengthen your boundaries. You build self-trust. And ironically, that's when people start to wake up and realize what they had. Because you're no longer trying to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. And that's the kind of woman someone never forgets. When a relationship ends or someone begins to pull away, it's easy to let your entire focus revolve around them. What they're doing, what they're thinking, where they miss you, whether they regret leaving. Your mind races with questions that have no answers. And you find yourself checking their social media, replaying old conversations, and wondering if they're with someone new. But all of that energy, all of that attention is still going to them. And the more energy you give to someone who's no longer choosing you, the more power you give them over your life. That's where everything begins to shift. When you choose to redirect that energy back into yourself, there's something incredibly powerful about taking your focus off someone else and placing it entirely on you. It's not about pretending you don't care or becoming emotionally numb. It's about recognizing that no one else is responsible for your happiness, your growth, or your peace of mind. When you shift your attention away from what they're doing and toward what you can control, your mindset, your goals, your routines, you begin to rebuild something far more valuable than a lost relationship you rebuild yourself. Think of it this way. Your attention is like currency. It's limited and it's valuable. If you spend all of it on someone who isn't investing in you, you're running at a loss. But when you start investing it into yourself, the return is exponential. You get clarity. You get momentum. You get your self-worth back, not because someone validated it, but because you started acting like someone who values themselves. This shift in focus doesn't mean you won't miss them. Of course you will. You're human. You built memories, shared moments, and maybe even imagined a future with them. But what makes people linger in your mind isn't the missing. It's the lack of movement. When you sit still in their absence, when you stop progressing, they take up more space than they should. But the moment you start moving forward, working on your body, your career, your friendships, your mindset, you create a life that's too full, too rich, too vibrant for their memory to dominate. Here's the paradox: when you focus on you, you don't just heal faster. You also become more attractive. There's a magnetism to someone who's living fully, who's not waiting on a text or consumed by the past. Confidence grows. Your energy changes. You stop needing their approval, and that's when they feel the difference. It's not that you've become cold. It's that you've become complete. And that is what people regret losing. The truth is, people come back for who you are, not who you were when they left. If they remember someone who was always available, always giving, always sacrificing themselves to make the relationship work, they may feel guilt, but they won't feel loss. But if they look back and see someone who turned their pain into power, who elevated every part of their life without them, that's when the regret kicks in. That's when they realize they didn't just lose a partner. They lost a high-value person who won't be waiting around when they finally figure it out. Redirecting your focus is the quiet revolution. It's not loud or dramatic. It happens in the small moments. The mornings you get up and make yourself proud, the times you choose peace over chaos, the decisions you make that align with your future instead of clinging to your past. Those choices add up, and over time, they transform you, not to win someone back, but to win yourself back, because the goal was never to make them regret losing you. The goal is to live in such a way that you stop regretting giving them so much of you in the first place. When someone starts treating you like an option, it's tempting to prove your worth, to show them how good you are, how loyal, how much you're willing to fight for the connection. But the painful truth is this: the more you tolerate, the more they test. The more you bend, the more they assume you'll never break. This is why it's absolutely essential to set a standard, and more importantly, to keep it. Not through threats, not through ultimatums, but through action. Through the quiet, unwavering confidence of someone who knows what they will and won't accept. Your standard isn't a line you draw in the sand when emotions are high. It's the foundation of your self-respect. It's built on what you know you deserve, not what you hope someone might eventually give you. People reveal themselves over time. If he shows you inconsistency, emotional unavailability, or disrespect, and you stay hoping he'll change, you're not holding a standard. You're teaching him that he can get away with less. And here's where most people get stuck. They confuse patience with endurance. They tell themselves, relationships take work. He's just figuring things out. Maybe if I just give him more time, he'll appreciate me. But time doesn't create value. Standards do. Time spent hoping someone rises to meet your worth is time you're not spending with someone who already would. When you set a standard, you're not being difficult. You're being clear. You're saying, this is how I love, this is how I communicate, and this is how I expect to be treated in return. And if he doesn't meet that, you don't force it. You don't beg. You walk. That act alone communicates more than any emotional conversation ever could. Because anyone can say they know their worth, but few actually prove it when it's inconvenient, when it hurts, or when it means letting go of someone they deeply care about. Now here's the key. Keeping your standard isn't about punishing him. It's about protecting your peace. It's about creating space for the right people to enter your life. People who don't need to be convinced to treat you well. When you continue to entertain someone who isn't meeting your standard, you're sending a message to the universe and to yourself that you'll settle. And nothing erodes self-esteem faster than constantly shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. What often happens when you keep your standard, especially with someone who's been coasting on your emotional generosity, is they realize you're not bluffing. That moment you stop chasing and start detaching, a shift happens. They go from assuming you'll always be there to feeling the space you've left behind. That's when regret creeps in. Not because you guilted them into it, but because they finally understand what they losting. Someone who had the courage to walk when staying meant self-betrayal. And if they never come back, that's not your loss. That's clarity. That's confirmation that they were never going to meet you at the level you needed. The mistake most people make is thinking that losing someone is the worst case scenario. But it's not. The worst case scenario is losing yourself in the process of trying to keep someone else. So you don't outcry them. You don't outtalk them. You outgrow them. You move forward with grace, not resentment. Because people remember the ones who walked away when it got real. The ones who said, I'm not angry. I just know what I bring to the table, and I'm not going to spend another minute explaining it. That's not ego. That's emotional maturity. And that's exactly what makes someone realize, too late, that they let something rare slip through their fingers. There comes a point in every relationship where you feel the urge to explain yourself, to tell them why you're worth it, to remind them of everything you brought to the table. You want them to see you clearly, to understand what they're walking away from. But here's the hard truth. The more you explain your worth to someone, the less they actually value it. Because worth isn't something that should need explaining. It's something that should be recognized, respected, and reciprocated. When someone doesn't see your value, it's not your job to convince them. It's your job to accept that they aren't capable or willing to meet you where you deserve to be met. Trying to make someone see your worth is like handing them a mirror and begging them to look. If they don't already know what they're looking at, nothing you say is going to make them suddenly understand. And when you over-explain, you slowly chip away at your own confidence. You begin to internalize their indifference as a reflection of your inadequacy, when in reality, it's a reflection of their lack of readiness, maturity, or alignment. People don't fall in love because they're persuaded. They fall in love because they feel something real, something mutual. And when you find yourself constantly trying to prove your love, your loyalty, your depth, that's not connection. That's negotiation. That's survival mode. That's being stuck in a dynamic where you're hoping that if you just explain it the right way, if you just phrase it carefully enough, they'll finally get it. But real love doesn't require you to shrink yourself into palatable pieces. Weigh your absence. Real love doesn't put you in a position where you feel like you have to win someone over who already has access to your heart. When you stop explaining your worth, you create space for clarity. You begin to see who's genuinely interested in understanding you and who's just comfortable with your effort. You notice who shows up without prompting, who listens without needing to be asked twice, who values you without needing a breakdown of your value. That's where real intimacy starts. Not from a place of needing to be convinced, but from a place of being seen. There's an undeniable shift in energy when you go from trying to be chosen to simply choosing yourself. You stop waiting for their validation and start building your own. You stop asking, "Why can't they see what I bring?" and start asking, "Why am I offering it to someone who doesn't know how to receive it?" That question alone changes everything. It takes you out of emotional desperation and puts you back in control. When someone truly values you, they won't need a resume of your qualities. They'll feel it. They'll recognize it in how you carry yourself, in the consistency of your actions, in the way you show up. And if they don't, that's their loss to carry, not yours. That's their lesson to learn in your absence. Because trying to teach someone how to love you while you're actively being hurt is a form of emotional self-abandonment. It sends the message that you're willing to stay, even if it means being misunderstood. So let them misunderstand you if they must. Let them underestimate you. Let them walk away confused. You don't need to stay behind to explain who you are. The right person won't require a presentation. They'll know, they'll feel it, and they'll act accordingly. Your job is to keep being who you are, unapologetically, not louder, not softer, real, just you. And that, more than any words you could ever say, is what makes the deepest impact, the kind that lingers long after you're gone. There's a moment after heartbreak where you face a choosing, stay stuck in the story of what happened, or use that pain as fuel to become the person you were always meant to be. Most people get caught in the loop of rehashing the past, hoping that somehow, by understanding it better, they can change the outcome. But the truth is, growth doesn't come from overanalyzing what went wrong. It comes from rising, from deciding, day by day, to move forward, not to make them regret leaving, but to rebuild a version of yourself that's too strong, too focused, too fulfilled to ever beg for someone to come back. Leveling up isn't about pretending you're okay. It's not about faking confidence on social media or smiling through pain to prove a point. It's about doing the real work. It's about getting brutally honest with yourself and asking, where did I lose myself? Where did I accept less? What parts of me did I silence just to keep the peace? And once you start answering those questions, something powerful begins to happen. You stop trying to fix them and start fixing you. You pour your energy into your body, your mind, your future. You hit the gym not to become more attractive to them, but to become stronger for you. You start setting boundaries that maybe you ignored before. You show up to your life with intention. The same energy that once kept you up at night wondering if they cared starts flowing into your career, your friendships, your creativity. You stop asking, do they miss me? And start asking, am I proud of who I'm becoming? And here's the irony. When you level up, that's usually when they notice. Not when you're crying over them, not when you're trying to make them jealous, but when your light returns. When you walk into a room with confidence, when your eyes shine differently, when your absence, when you're no longer trying to prove your worth because you know it deep down. That's when regret hits. That's when the silence they once enjoyed becomes deafening, because you didn't just survive without them, you elevated. But let's be clear, their regret is not the goal. It's the byproduct. It's the echo of the life they chose to walk away from. You don't need to announce your glow up. You don't need to send subtle messages or prove you're better off. Your energy will speak for itself. And that's far more powerful than any revenge plan or social media post ever could be. The real victory isn't them crawling back. It's you reaching a point where, even if they did, you've grown so much, healed so deeply, and found so much inner peace that you wouldn't want what you once begged for. You outgrow the version of yourself that needed their validation. You stop craving the crumbs and start demanding the feast, not from them, but from life itself. This shift doesn't happen overnight. Some days it will feel like progress, and others like you're back at square one. But each time you choose yourself, each time you say no to something that doesn't align, each time you invest in your future instead of your past, you level up. And that process is sacred. It's yours. No one can take it from you. not even the person who broke your heart. Because the most beautiful revenge isn't a comeback story crafted to make someone feel bad. It's becoming someone you genuinely love being. Someone who doesn't need closure, doesn't need validation, and certainly doesn't need someone who couldn't see your worth the first time. You become the version of yourself that doesn't look back. Not because it didn't matter, but because you matter more. There's a profound difference between being someone who waits and being someone who walks away. When you wait, you put your life on hold. You sit in limbo, hoping that the other person wakes up one day and realizes what they had. You linger in the space between what was and what could be, measuring your worth by how long you're willing to stay available. But when you choose to walk away, truly walk away, you step out of that space. You stop being the option they assumed would always be there, and instead become the one they remember, the one that slipped through their fingers when they were too distracted or too unsure to act. The hardest part about being that person is that it requires discipline, emotional discipline. You have to resist the urge to check in, to explain yourself, to leave the door cracked open just in case they decide to come back. But true self-respect doesn't leave back doors. It closes the chapter with grace and then writes a new one with a stronger pen. It says, I felt deeply, I cared fully, but I refused to put my life on pause for someone who wasn't sure about me. People always remember the one who didn't wait around, the one who didn't plead or beg or stay stuck in the cycle of second chances and excuses. They remember the one who said, I love you, but I love me more. That's not cold. That's powerful, because it takes immense courage to walk away from someone you care about. Not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself enough to stop accepting less than you deserve. What most people don't realize is that the longer you wait, the more they believe they come and go as they please. The more available you are, the more they assume you'll always be. But when you remove your presence, when you take back your time, your energy, your kindness, that's when the reality of their actions sets in. That's when regret becomes real. Not because you tried to make them feel bad, but because they finally feel the void your absence created. And the truth is, if someone truly values you, they won't need you to disappear to understand it. But sometimes, unfortunately, it takes losing access to you for them to realize what they took for granted. That realization doesn't come when you're still replying to their late-night texts. It doesn't come when you're checking in to see how they're doing. It comes when you've stopped showing up, when you've redirected all love and energy inward, when you've moved on so quietly and gracefully that they can't ignore it. You become the one they compare others to, the one they talk about with that distant look in their eyes. Not because you stayed and fought for a place in their life, but because you knew when to leave it. You weren't the one who stayed the longest. You were the one who knew when it was time to let go. That's what haunts people. Not the drama, not the arguments, but the absence of someone who genuinely cared, someone who gave them a chance, and then, when they didn't show up, walked away without bitterness. That kind of exit leaves an imprint. It makes them rethink everything. Not because you said all the right things, but because you left without needing to. You weren't the fallback plan. You weren't the safety net. You were the real deal. And the ones who don't recognize that when they have it are often the same ones who spend years regretting the moment they let it go. So, here's what it all comes down to. If you want him to regret losing you, stop making him the center of the story. You don't need to chase, explain, prove, or wait. You need to live. You need to stand in your value so firmly that anyone who walks away from you doesn't just miss you. They feel the loss of something real, something rare, something they may never find again. Let your silence speak louder than your words. Let your growth be louder than your grief. Walk away not to get a reaction, but because you finally remembered who you are and what you deserve. Because when you do, you become unforgettable. Not for the way you begged to stay, but for the way you left with dignity, rebuilt yourself, and became the one they'll always wonder about. Not the one who waited, the one who walked and never looked back.